Well, welcome. I am your host, Cindy Watson, and today we are talking with Bess DeBoer about how to untangle the knots of conflict. And it's such a pleasure to have you here, Bess. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And for those of you who don't know Bess DeBoer, you are in for a real treat here. Bess is an absolute powerhouse. I have known her for many years. She's an internationally acclaimed master mediator and conflict resolution specialist. She's known for crafting really highly creative settlements in difficult matters, and she helps parties understand the sort of human reality beneath each side of the conflict. So you can see why I just had to have Bess here. Her philosophy definitely lines up with everything that we are about here at the Art of Feminine Negotiation. So Bess, I'd love if you could, tell our listeners a little bit about how you came to do this work.
Yes, well, I'd like to describe it as coming from the war zone, the front lines, as you have as well, Cindy, in terms of litigation. And it really takes either an innate talent for the gladiator approach to conflict, or a developed skill over time. And I think for me, it was a developed and acquired skill driven very much from this, coming from an immigrant family, wanting to achieve a certain status. And, you become a doctor or a lawyer, right? So
Yeah.
my route was the legal route because I had the gift of the gab. And ever since I was a young child, I was always involved in negotiating one thing or another, very much like yourself in terms of family situation. So it was sort of the natural way for me to go, but it was never something that completed my soul. And I put it on that level because I think it very much has to do, my choices have to do with that for me. I think it's very important that whatever we do in life, like, of course, some of us don't have the privilege to do that, but if you can, to align your being with the work you do is to achieve that higher level of excellence with not as much effort. So you're not going against the current. You're flowing with what your soul has come on this planet to do and to teach and to give. And I am a firm believer of that. I've come by it with maturity and with a lot of life experience. You don't come into this world sort of knowing it, but you do see the roots of it early on. You don't identify them quite that way. So it takes time. So I want to say that the first part of my life, I sort of have two sections that in the way I look at my trajectory in my life. The first part was really led by that need to achieve and to prove and to really justify my parents' sacrifice as I saw it from an immigrant family's point of view. And so, like I said, I became a lawyer, really driven, Bay Street, frontline, courtroom work. And it was exhilarating because I loved helping people. I really loved helping people ever since I was a little girl. But in the context of the courtroom, it was really structured and defined. So the helping became questionable over time.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've experienced this, right? So that's when I started to think again about my choices and really what was I doing? Because it wasn't about the achievements, only the achievements on the surface and sort of ticking all the boxes and having all the wins. And I was blessed. I had an incredible courtroom career. I really did. And some of it is luck, some of it is my own effort. Like I said, I was extremely driven, but it left a lot to be desired because regardless of the accomplishments or the achievements in any particular case or big trials that I handled, people were always left broken on one level or another in the end.
Yeah.
Even the winners, even the people I worked so hard for to give them what they were seeking, they ultimately received it, or they got what they were looking for, but it never really made them whole. And not only did that thing that they were chasing not make them whole, but also it left them broken. Like there's a toll that's taken on both sides. And I don't know if you agree with me, Cindy, but I think people overlook the toll on the winning side, right?
Absolutely.
We tend
Including our
to
legal profession, right? Like we go away going, oh, I got the win without looking at the consequences for a client. It often reminds me of that movie. Do you remember Gladiator with Russell Crowe?
Yes. I was just going to say that.
It doesn't matter who wins in that arena. They all come away just broken and devastated from the process. So I totally hear you on that.
Exactly. So, and I think once, the final bill was delivered, and the celebrations were over. I'm sure you've been there on this level with your own practice, right? There was a sense of deflation, right? Even when you had done everything you possibly could have done and your client won and they got the money or they got the property returned or whatever it was that we were arguing about, it wasn't enough because the cost that it was exacting was so huge, right? So there was always reflection and there was always, debate, and, they look at the bill and there was frustration. There was never this, thank you, you really helped me. There was some of that, the flowers and the celebrations, but it died quickly. And then it was like, what, the remnants that were left over. So over time, I think it had to do with two things. First of all, I started really young. I kind of was so driven. I got into law school after 2 years in economics undergrad, and everything, I was 24 and litigating. So all that to say that by the time I hit 30, 32, 33, whatever, I was reflecting back and saying, okay, I've been there and done this, but have I really helped? Is this really what I'm craving? And at that time, to be very honest with you, I could not have articulated it like this, because I think it takes maturity, life experience, right? Not intelligence. People think, oh yeah, we're bright people, we can figure things out. Not so. We need to go through those pitfalls, right? We need to have reflection backwards to be able to understand. So was invited by a client, just to tell you a little bit, digress for a moment, to join in and take a company public, just to take a sabbatical for a year. And this was all so foreign and so exciting for me. But I really just wanted to change. So I jumped out of, I talked to my partners and we cut up the deal in terms of what I would be bringing in on this venture. It was a very high profile company, film company. And off I went. And as fate would have it, and I'm talking about this in my TED Talk, Cindy, that I'll be doing in Italy, because it is what actually showed me the worst conflict I had ever experienced within the context of this film company. And all of these big wig players, some of you whom you would know, like big names in Toronto, that were really crooked underneath and created a massive, explosion that I was left to deal with. And I'm reminded of this saying that says, we take a road to avoid our fate, but it's on that road that we actually need it. We can't escape it. So I moved away from conflict briefly in this, new job. And then here it was, the greatest conflict I had ever met. So this gave me a lot to really think about. And what it did is it allowed me to step out of the entire conflict zone in terms of the courtroom and rethink things and look at it from a very different perspective. So I did a lot of other things in between. I was financing films and I fell in love with the love of my life. That's my husband now, and kind of traipsed the world, with him. But the whole time I was reflecting on, okay, what went so wrong? How could I have achieved so much and then never want to go back there? Because my partnership was waiting for me. But I kind of just settled everything and walked off. And that says a lot, right? And when you're a thinker, when you're the type of person, it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's more of the need to get to the bottom of one's actions. What's really driving us, to get beneath the surface behavior, which for me was very important. Because up until that time, Cindy, I was, like I said before, really driven by everyone else's needs in my life, people I needed to please, right? So
And I want to really put a pin in something that you said there for our listeners, because when you talked about not being able to until that, 30, 31, 32, where you've got that maturity to be able to reflect. Absolutely. And I would amplify that. I think it also takes time for us to push back against a lifetime of deep conditioning about how we define success and what it means to win and how our system is set up. So I think we have these mini epiphanies along the way, but that deep-seated conditioning pushes back and then we fall back into those patterns. So I love that you speak to that. Now, I know that your signature model for conflict resolution is like finding the story that lies beneath the surface. I'd love if you could tell us about that. I thought that was beautiful.
That's right. The human story. There's always a story which I attribute to a wound that lays very much hidden. The deeper the wound, the lower it is under the surface. And it truly requires a very gingerly excavation with the other person to resurface it so that they can put it at the table so that you can meet meet it at its face value and try to heal it in a very real way. And very few people have actually, within the context of conflict, the courage to do that. I'm not talking now about as professionals, as lawyers or mediators, but the parties involved, because we walk in with such deep fear. And this is part of what I teach. I think the driver for conflict is fear. It wears many masks, right? It can be anger, avoidance, antagonism, or all kinds of things, but it is always present. And the more sophisticated we are, the more attuned we are to handling conflictuous situations, the more adept we are to hiding it. So it's not always so easy to see it. And it's an avoidance. We don't want to see it ourselves because it's our weaker part, right? So we push it deeply into our being. And we do everything we can to not reveal it because, of course, this means weakness in our mind, right? And in fact, it's not weakness, it's our strength. When we can own that part of us that's hurting and put it on the table and bring forth our humanness, guess what happens? We give permission for the other person to become human as well. So now we're at a different level of communication. And literally, I've done this in corporate situations. I've done it in very intimate situations, in family contexts or other personal conflict. It matters not. I don't care if you're negotiating between corporations and conflict on that level, or who is going to get the child support or time or whatever within a family situation. So it's like magic. And I'm like the kid in the candy store when I describe this, because I don't know how to say this, and I think you might be the first to whom I'm expressing it sincerely, Cindy, but I felt like I've had this jar locked up with these, candies that I've just sort of opened up and tasted. And I thought, wow, it actually is a lot better than I perceived it and imagined it and worked on in my mind. Because my job shows me this every day. I walk away shocked. And my husband, like I'll share some stuff with him, obviously without facts on the case. And I'll say, there was this amazing transformation. And he says, the biggest surprise to me, he would say, is that you're so surprised every time. Because you know what I mean? And because he gets it and he sees it and he's like, yeah, right. You tell me this every time. But for me, it's like, wow, this really works regardless. And this is important, I think, for our listeners, regardless of the obstinance or how difficult we assess the person on the other side to be.
I love that you talk about the candy jar, because I just recently in my book had talked about that. Like, it's about that vulnerability, right? And people are so afraid of losing face, losing something. So it's about getting past that hard candy exterior and find the soft centered candy that they're trying to protect. And I love your analogy about the candy, because it's like, I think that's so beautiful that you're excited about this candy and you want to share it with the world. It's like, this candy is so good.
That's right.
To share it with the world. I think
that's right. That's right.
Now, I love your tagline, I know, is the architect of yes. So tell us a bit about that moniker.
Well, it is exactly about architecture. I think it's a construction that happens, and this is from the perspective of the mediator. But if we don't have the benefit of someone in between who, can really guide the situation and take it to the next level in terms of shaping and assisting the communication, we can do that ourselves. We just need to walk in with the intention of building the platform so that the other will listen, so that we will be heard. And there's only one way to do this, and it's counterintuitive. All of this is a bit of a counterintuitive approach because we're built differently. We're conditioned, I should say, differently. We're not born this way, but all the layers of all the issues, that we face put us in this position where we feel so defensive. But actually, if you want to be heard, what do you have to do? Listen first. Listen first, right? If you want to be understood, you must understand first. So what you're doing actually is you're paving the road for the other. Now, when people don't have either the depth or sometimes the knowledge or sophistication to understand this, they feel that they're leaving things on the table, like they're giving instead of trying to get, right? What's our tendency, our fear-driven tendency? to get, to hold,
Yeah.
right? To not lose. But it's actually the opposite. So my agenda every time, like when I walk into a mediation, just to give you from that perspective, I assess very quickly. And that's, I think, it's an intuitive thing. I think I have a gift for that. I understand people. I did since I was a child, but of course I have training now.
Yeah.
So very quickly, I know who is the difficult person.
Yeah.
The difficult person is not always the person in the wrong.
Yeah.
It's the person with the
Yes.
greatest amount of fear.
Yeah.
The person that is so strapped
Yeah.
by their own fear, they can't just relax and be and open themselves to the other.
Yeah.
So I'm very good at assessing that very quickly. And once I do, and usually that person is seen as the villain.
Yes.
By the other or
Yeah.
by others. If you were observing, you'd say, okay, this is I could use some adjectives that I'll refrain, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're always wrong, Cindy. I have never seen a case that
True.
has proven me wrong on this, because it's that person that actually has the kindest, softest heart,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that it's so buried so deeply because they have been so pushed down by life, by circumstances, by the other. And the weaker they feel, the more aggressive they need to be on the surface, right?
Yeah.
We present like gladiators because we're little mice inside.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
we're the lion doesn't have to tell, the lion just walks steadily in the forest and the ground hears, right?
Yeah.
It's a great analogy, actually, because I
Yeah.
really think we behave the same way as people.
It's true.
So the person that's coming to the equation as the victim, that's sort of counting on me to carry them and advocate their case and, stare down and put in place the villain, is sitting there shocked. And I know this already, but I don't explain this in advance, because what I do is work very methodically to calm the person that I see as the problem in the equation down. And to do that, we have to bring out their humanness, which means we have to carry them, really carry them and make them feel whole, which when you're an observer and you don't know my methodology, seems counterintuitive and sometimes downright crazy, right? So
I love it. I love it. And it's interesting because most conflict at some level comes from that sense of powerlessness, as you said. So then that need to
and
sort of
fear.
Yes. And I love when you talk about that, sort of paving that path to have people feel truly seen and heard and understood. And it triggers that reciprocity, right? Even with the most difficult, intransigent people, with very few exceptions, it opens space for more creativity. Now, I know after you've done that, you describe your job as sort of untangling those intractable knots, which I just love that analogy. I think it's so apt. So, a lot of people, when faced with knots, most people just give up, right? So tell me what are some of your strategies? What would you suggest for our listeners about how to approach those tough knots so that they can start to unravel them and find that straight line?
I think actually this is interesting because they unravel themselves when you're able to resurface the humanness of the person that has really pulled them so tight, they seem intractable, right? In fact, they are intractable. They take that elevation of the other person to the level of their humanity, right? We lose it in conflict, and we all lose it, Cindy. I lose it in my private situations where none of us are above this. This is something that is innate and at the same time very much forgotten, because what's also innate and more powerful is our instinct for survival, which you know all about, right? So when we're faced with a threat, what do? We hunker down, we armor up, and we are ready to fight because we need to survive. And that is, we don't actually need that instinct any longer, but it's so deeply, it's inherent in our humanness, right? That it surfaces instantly. So when you can quiet that down for someone, when you can gingerly bring them, elevate them out of that into their humanness, they shift themselves. The work is done for you. The problem is that because both sides are in a state of fear, which is logical in a very difficult conflict scenario, they can't calm themselves down enough to exercise this methodology, but it's transformational. And so that's the work, that's the untangling. It's the, the taking the layers of fear off to reflect for the other person their reality. Their reality is not the conflict. It's not their anger. It's not their smallness. Those are the facts, right? Those are the physical, the situation. You lost something, someone took, whatever it is. But really, it's not who they are.
I
right?
love the
So,
analogy because I can actually see it, right? Like you see this big knot, and
yes,
what you're describing as you let that person feel seen and heard and peel back some of that fear, those knot they loosen, right? Like it's when you've got
yes,
one of those big, you can see them start to loosen, and then it makes the way for them to
yes,
fall open. I think that's just gorgeous. And I love that you use the word elevated because I'm a big fan of what, I call it elevated active listening. But, when you're reflecting back to somebody in that active listening,
exactly.
to reflect back to them their position even more graciously and make their argument more compelling than they made it themselves. And again, I find it's that jolt for the other side to go, oh, okay, they are hearing, even and especially when you disagree, and it opens that space for that reciprocity again. I think it's beautiful.
Exactly. And I think a very important tool is to find what I call something that is a gift to give.
Yeah.
And the gift you give is something about that person, a generous statement, the thing that you find you have an aversion towards expressing.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to see anything good about the other when
know.
we're in a conflict situation, right? Because we're afraid. Like if I praise you,
Yeah.
God help me, I'm diminishing myself,
Yeah.
I'm undermining my case. You know how it goes, right?
Yeah.
We couldn't be more wrong about that. But
Yeah.
it is intuitive and we all do it. So it's that moment where you find something that you can actually offer the other about themselves, something that you can say about their sense of generosity, about some fact that may or may not be centrally relevant, but that elevates them because they're disarmed instantly. They're like, okay, wait, they
Yeah.
see me.
Yeah.
And the more you see them,
Yes.
the more they want to make you right.
Yes.
Like if I say to you, Cindy, you're the most compassionate, one of the most compassionate people I have come across. And I see it mostly in this scenario when you're feeling so threatened. Like, I understand how this feels. All of a sudden, you're going, okay, she sees that in me. I
Yeah.
better be that. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh,
it would.
totally. I call that inviting somebody to step into the best version of like when they're being
There
really
you go. Yes.
respectable. I'm
Yes.
like, I know it's so important to you to treat people with dignity and respect. And then
Right.
immediately they're like,
Yes.
oh, yeah. As
That's
opposed
right.
to like, hey, you're treating me like crap. Who do you think you are? Where they get defensive. You invite them to step into that better version. I think it's gorgeous. Tell us a bit about your 3 keys to agreement.
So there's 3 steps basically, which is the first is to stop, to really, really put aside your grievance just for a moment. And this is the trickiest part because we walk in armed, full. We're oozing, our grievance is oozing out of us, right? I have these visuals because I see them in people every day, right? So we walk in and we can't see past it. We have our issue. I have my issue with you, and I'm coming, locked and loaded to dump that thing on you and let you know just exactly how you have wronged me, right? Yeah. So imagine now if you have the grace and the patience to make space for that for me, right? So you just stop. You don't put your grievance in. Well, that's your version, lady. Wait till I tell you mine, right? But we just stay quiet and we listen. We give room for the other, right? Yeah. We just stop and we make space for the other story. So we invite them to come into our space and to really hear them, which is step 2. So step 2 is once we've made space for them to come in, to approach us, then we have to be very, very quiet and listen. Yes. Listening is the key, is the most important thing that we can do. Listening it's a different kind of listening than most people think about. It's active in a way, but more than that, it's to allow. It's an allowance, right? I'm allowing you to be heard. I'm absorbing who you are in every sense of the word. Your being, your words, what you're expressing beneath the words. I'm just observing. I'm trying to see your pain, right? I'm doing an audit, a mental audit saying, where is Cindy stuck here? What's driving this? This is my excavation through the listening. Where's that wound, right? It's only through the listening that I'm going to find that out. Yeah. And then once I've unearthed that or exposed, through the listening, because you're telling me, because people want to be heard. They will tell you everything if you give them the space to do it. Yeah. Right. And that's open-ended questions. That's, silence after the question to really listen. Yeah. That's not moderating or shaping what they've said because it's a little frightening for you to hear. You have to take the whole enchilada that they're giving you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Really Yeah. And then after that, you have to find it in your heart. And this is the tough part for everybody, right? The courage to understand. Because here's where people falter, Cindy. They think that understanding equates with agreeing.
Yes.
It does not.
Exactly.
Right? It doesn't. I can understand you and still have an entirely different point of view, still not agree with you, but I can understand your reality. I can say, you know what, Cindy, I really see how you see this thing. And I really feel what you're feeling. That doesn't mean I haven't said I agreed with anything yet.
Oh, totally.
Right? In fact, I may entirely disagree. But just that, I mean, if you do, we can do an experiment because it works every time. Like just hearing those words, if we were in a situation of disagreement, it just calms you down. There's something about them.
It's so
just
true.
me saying, you know, Cindy, I really understand how you're feeling. I can see why that would really hurt you. I can see why that would really hurt you. I'm not saying you're right to be hurt.
I know. It's so
I'm
powerful.
just stepping, right?
Yeah.
That's what empathy is all about.
Oh, such a powerful shift. And I love the language that you use around this as well, that allowing and excavation and courage and curiosity. I mean, these are words that we don't give enough credit for. And in North America in particular, I think it's important to get this message because we don't listen well. We are not taught to, we wait for our turn to speak. We believe that the person talking the loudest and longest is the person, you know, winning. And I just imagine a world like our philosophies are so in line. I love everything about what you've just said, Bess.
Thank
and
you.
I just can't help sort of closing my eyes and imagining a world where we all started stepping in. If this becomes the new norm, where we start reframing how we look at conflict, how we look at power, how we look at negotiating, and see these as gorgeous opportunities rather than that gladiator ring you were talking about. Now, I know you've talked a bit about it already, I know
I have to interrupt for one
Yeah,
second to
of
say, just hearing you speak about this way makes me emotional. Like this is how deeply this runs for me. And there's no shame in revealing that because I think that if we don't step in and own the work we do, like if it's not coming from this place of heart for us, it's always received differently. People are not stupid. You know what I mean? We can't fool them into this kind of empathetic state if we are not that ourselves. So it's everything you're saying.
And I think when we model that vulnerability, it opens up that space for more creative solutions. And I think a lot of people get nervous. That fear makes us drive when we see somebody else that's showing up with a big ego or a strong personality. And I know that's a particular talent of yours, is sort of managing those big egos and personalities to find those creative solutions. And you've talked about some of those strategies already, I think, beautifully. Any other tips you have for how to manage egos in negotiations?
I think the bigger the ego in the room, the more I try to elevate that person. Again, it comes back to the same story I was speaking about earlier. And that's counterintuitive because what we want to do actually is push that ego down, check it, keep it in check because it's overwhelming the room. But you will find that when you give people room, right, they settle down.
It's true.
Because actually they can't fill the room. It's the fear that drives them to be so big. But when you give them, it's like saying, okay, you want to do this here. Here's the space. Come into my space. I'm allowing you to step in. I'm allowing you to encroach. And all of a sudden, something shifts. They're thinking twice about being seen as encroaching. I know this sounds like backwards, but
all
I can tell you is that I experience it every day, and it's really working. It has it's been an experiment for me too, because don't forget, you and I both come from a very different world, right? We were gladiators. So that does not die an easy death, right? There are parts of me, like we did a case together not so long ago, and I saw that tiger, and it's the case I refer to you for that reason, because there's a place for it, right? In the courtroom. Right? But, and sometimes it's unavoidable. So, I'm not poo-pooing on the courtroom. I'm just saying there's just such a better way to do things, right? And less expensive and more elevating. And I could
better outcome
on the, exactly. Better outcome because, and you know why it's a better outcome? Because it's shaped by the people who are intimately concerned about what it needs to look like.
Absolutely.
The judge doesn't know.
Better buy-in.
I mean, how many times have you had judgments where you look and you're scratching your head? It's like, okay, we won, but does it really fit no, right?
Absolutely. I love it. Now, what role do you think, and this is a sort of very controversial question, so what role, if any, do you think that gender plays in negotiation?
A huge role, because I'm an old school thinker, right? I think that the male ego still dominates across the room, and that we as women need to be very much aware of that, because it is a reality we have to deal with. But I haven't seen much of a change in all of the, we talk a good game, but when it comes right down to it, the instinct, it's like the survival instinct, right? The male driven instinct is very different than the female. And I don't think there's any shame in that. We're different. I wouldn't want to be like them, and I'm sure they don't want to be like us, right? But I think it can be managed. And this goes back to what I'm saying. It's like the villain in the room. The person I perceive to be intransigent is the person I'm going to give the most time to. When I'm willing to receive your maleness, that ego driven, forceful kind of expression, once you've been heard, again, you settle down, because it's like, okay, they're listening, right? They might be listening, but what I'm doing is taking notes of every point that I have now to come back with, and to sort of shape you into line. So we don't need to see this as some kind of capitulation, right? But it depends. I mean, I don't want to separate, this between genders so emphatically, because I know women that behave like that as well, especially a lot of us in professions like ours, because we're trained to do that, right? That was the big shift I was talking at the beginning, because I owned that for real when I was a courtroom lawyer. But is it me? I mean, you know me intimately, it's not me. So that's where the breakdown happens, when we're not being ourselves, right? So it can be the women too, but I see it predominantly with men, between men, especially. Like when I'm negotiating in a corporate context and it's two, executives, I mean, the room is filled with testosterone and just ego and proving. And I hate to generalize, but it happens a lot, right? I don't know if your experience is the same, but.
Well, and it's interesting when you talk about these things being counterintuitive, these approaches. I think they're counterintuitive because of our conditioning, right? And I think the more we talk about this stuff and show up from a place of compassion to have these dialogues more openly, I can see it. I am hopeful there'll be a shift. And I think COVID has exacerbated or opened the space for that shift, I think, to maybe happen a little more quickly than might have otherwise happened. So
I think the shift needs to happen by really understanding where power lies.
Yes.
Because I think our concept of what is powerful is backwards.
Yes. Totally.
Right? Yeah. Being on the offensive and aggression and loudness and power on an overt sort of demeanor, even the stance, all that is superficial. Real power comes from our heart, right? And what I say is that we need, when we're dealing with really difficult conflict, we need to not be in a stance of the warrior, but in the stance of our humanness.
Yes.
Right.
So
in that stance that, I think that's really that tenderness of ourselves is what we, and those are the warriors. That takes guts to do. When I see that, I take my hat off to people like that. I'm thinking, wow, this person's on their game, because they're so confident. They can be seen. They can say, okay, bring it on. I can hear you. It's okay. I can hear your side. I'm still whole, because I know where my side lies. The more powerful you are, the more willing you are to hear the other.
I was just going to say that it's the ultimate expression of power. And I think the difference, you hit the nail on the head, Bess, it's that concept of power over other people that we've been conditioned to versus power with, right? When we come with tapping into more constructive and elegant versions of power, like the power of purpose, coming with a deep purpose, the power of coming from a place of service, the power of surrounding ourselves with like-minded, like there are all kinds of sources of power, the power of curiosity. And I think that's a beautiful sort of replay. And tied to what role do you think emotion plays in negotiations? I mean, so often we hear emotion has no place in a negotiation. I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
I think it has all the place. I think it is really important to be put on the table, because again, if we shove that down, right? If we leave that out of the room and out of the equation, we're not really solving the conflict. So I'm never interested about the widgets. I owe you 3, you give me 2, whatever. That's not so. I haven't solved anything when I do that, because I will leave the room. You will have your widgets, or I will have mine, or we'll split them down the middle, but we will never speak together again, Cindy. And that is never my objective.
Yes.
Because when I can meet Cindy's heart to heart, then you know what? Cindy's going to be saying to me, here, if I kind of see why you really need this extra widget.
Yes.
And I can see how I need that. So maybe we can kind of turn the tables. If you can give me this one, which I really can't do without, you can have the one you really need. And that's when you've come to some kind of resolution that is so high level, right? Because you're leaving like as friends on a level,
Yeah.
like you're really understanding one another. And people are so surprised that if you have a moment, I'll digress and tell you, because one of my most difficult cases was a family case, actually, a couple that with a severely disabled child. It's part of my talk, actually, because it's so profound, this experience that I had. And the husband was, the wife came to me distraught. She just took this child and moved into a basement to escape.
Wow.
He was described as a monster, and I think on many levels he was driven to a point of behaving like that. But when we walked, I convinced her to do this three-way meeting. She was so terrified, she didn't even want to. She wanted to do it like by Zoom or remote, and which I never usually do in complicated situations. And half an hour in, this guy had transformed. He was like this iceberg that melted into a puddle in the room, because what was driving him was his pain.
Of course.
Such deep pain and guilt for the child, for the illness, for the taking it all on, that it made him behave monstrously.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So I always say, there are no villains.
Yeah.
There's only wounds that drive people to act villainously. And I have not met, an exception to that rule, because we all have a part of us that's villainous. I mean, it's part of no one's either angel or villain. But to just place that label on someone so kind of randomly because they're in a state where they're behaving like that, I think is really to leave a lot on the table when you're not digging beneath that to see who they are and bring them out to play on the same level as you. Elevate them so you can be on the same level, and then you get a chance of figuring things out,
Yeah. Oh, and such an important point. I want to really put a pin in that, right? Because we often, and it's like that Amanda Marshall song, right? Everyone has a story that could break your heart. And when you're dealing with somebody who seems so reprehensible, or the conduct is so reprehensible, that invariably is coming from a place of pain, as you say, that wound, right? And just really allow yourself to bring that empathy by thinking of yourself at the worst moment of your life, because we all have that capacity, and you have no idea what they're going through. And I love
an excellent point. Yeah.
And it's that's where that magic happens when you talk about that, when you can unpack that, because when you're talking about the widgets, that really resonated with me, because you have that magic where here you're fighting over the widgets, and all of a sudden it's like, no, here, you take it. You need it more than I do. And that's where the space opens for the creativity in negotiations to get those unexpected outcomes that are where you get the better buy-in and longer lasting agreements. So I love that.
And what I would say for people that have a real resistance to this, because it is a very vulnerable position to take at the beginning, you're really exposing. It's like you're into the milk part of the chocolate bar, right? Not the crust. And so this is difficult for people. But what I reach for, like the mirror I put up for that person, is what it will feel like when they arrive there. Forget the other person and what you're doing for them. Like, I feel like I'm walking on air when I have been able to reach someone with my communication, right? Like I really do. So when you are able to say, wow, I spoke in a way where that person listened and they didn't feel threatened. And they actually understood me. So you feel empowered. So it's not like we're giving. No, I think we're taking more than
it's true.
I think we're elevating our being, right? But people miss that part entirely, unfortunately. A lot of people do, but I really think that it's the truth. I'm not, So, and I know you agree, because I know the work you do and the way you speak about it. And
so speaking my language, it's gorgeous. And I'd love your thoughts, and you've already touched on so many of them, just to kind of pull together some of this. What do you see as the key sort of skills or hallmarks of a great negotiator?
Of a great negotiator, listening would be right up there, the first, because I think that you can't make an argument, you can't take a position, regardless of anything else I've said about the diplomacy of the whole thing or how you approach it, without understanding, right? So how do we arrive at understanding? First, we need to know the wall we're facing. We perceive it, but we don't understand it fully until we have heard and identified all the bricks of which it is made. The recipe, right? I cannot take anything apart until I know the components. So the best way to serve myself is to stay very quiet and to really listen and understand what I'm facing. Even if we don't at the beginning, even if we're not able to get to that altruistic place that I'm speaking about, right? It's in our interest for sure to understand what the other person's talking about. Because only then, even if it's in a more aggressive stance, which I don't advise, but happens, only then can we appropriately meet them, right, at where they need to be met. If we don't understand them, we've lost the game before we start, and listening is the only way to achieve understanding. So it's listening, open-ended questions, really receiving the other person, and really thinking about what they're saying. Don't be afraid to understand the other's position. To understand it in all its aspects. Like, I don't know if you ever, come across this, but a lot of people will avoid certain questions of the other, their opponent, because they don't want to hear it. It's just too scary, right? It's like, I'm not going to go there. That's a hornet's nest, right? They hide from that. But the hornet's nest isn't going to go away. So we might as well bring it out and figure out what it's about, right? So
yeah, it's funny. I've been talking a lot lately about leaning in, which is sort of
leaning in.
Yeah, I think when we're faced with that potential hornet's nest, we kind of back off. And if you think of a doctor, it's the messiness and the goop that allows them to diagnose. An IT person, if they stepped away every time the computer was freezing up or spewing stuff, they wouldn't be able to. So lean in. That's where the gold is, right? So
great analogy. Great analogy. That's right. And we need to ask ourselves, like, what's the fear for me? Why am I not able to do this? What's running for me? Because those are clues as well about what's holding us back.
So much. Speaking of gold, there have been so many incredible gold nuggets in this, Bess. I can't thank you enough. And I can't believe how fast our time has gone. And
I know.
I'd like to end.
It's such a pleasure. I could talk to you for hours.
Well, I'm going to have to get you back. We're going to have to do a part 2 of this for sure.
Yes.
We sort of scratched the surface, but there's layers and layers here. And your approach, I think, is so important. And I normally like to end by saying, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be on this issue. It can be on anything. But what aha moment would you share with our listeners?
I think it's the idea of really turning inward in those moments when you feel resistance and really questioning that. I think if we can resolve that knot within ourselves, we open the road. And when I understood that, most of the times when I felt offended or I felt oppressed or I felt not heard or, any other ones of those things that trigger us, right? It was the realization that something was running in me. It's not about the other. So I would say that's my biggest aha in all of this work, that it is this direction that we need to look at. And yet all they teach us, as you know, and all the preparation is what? How am I going to bombard and approach the other? Try walking in about, how am I going to show up? How am I going to walk in? What prep do I need to do right here? And that you're in control of. It's a gift, right? Because you're one up right there because you prepared yourself for how you're going to enter.
Oh, and I love that answer because it's so layered, right? I mean, both in our negotiations, definitely, like when people, when we feel attacked or bombarded, we either shut down or lash out. So being able to take that moment to go inward, but even in our life generally, to us, like, a lot of my sort of negotiation models are about doing that inner prep first, right?
Yes, I know.
What are my fears? How does ego show up for me? What am I too attached to? What are my triggers that make me reactive? Like really self-explore. So I think
it's amazing because I read a lot of what you write and everything, and I see your transformation too, Cindy, because I mean, we were both two barracudas back in the day, right? And I'm thinking, but you even more, I mean, you are a powerhouse. And I'm thinking, you're looking at things so differently, and it's equally powerfully, but so differently, right? I'm completely impressed with your work. You're a gift to this world, I can tell you.
Thank you. And I think it's a game changer. I feel so passionately about it because I know myself.
I can see it. I can see you're beaming.
You feel like you get better results taking the Barracuda approach, but the reality is you get way better, more creative outcomes, unexpected outcomes when you allow yourself to come from that open place of vulnerability. It's such a beautiful transformation. So exactly. So thank you so much for being with us, Beth.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And tell us where. I know we've got bestdeboer.com. Is that the best place for people to reach out to you? Or
That's my website. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn and on Facebook here and there, not so much there, but I am here, from time to time, all under Bess DeBoer. Yeah.
Beautiful. And we're going to make sure to put that in the show notes for everybody out there. If you've got a conflict
Thank
and
you.
you need very high-end mediator who's going to take an approach that's going to get you better outcomes, you make sure to check out Bess DeBoer. And I am sure that you
Thank
all
you.
just got loads and loads of value from this episode. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet. Feel free to give us a 5-star rating or whatever rating you feel appropriate, and give the gift of sharing. I mean, and in particular with this episode, there were so many incredible, beautiful, life-changing nuggets here, both personally and professionally. So share this episode with somebody that you care about. You may be giving them the biggest gift of their life. And before we sign off today, just want to share a couple ways we can work together as well. If you're looking to up-level your negotiation skills, I've got everything from online to my signature one-on-one and VIP experiences to help you leverage your power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting, check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.